Hello, today I have with me Phyllis Campbell, Chairman, Pacific Northwest at JP Morgan Chase. Welcome, Phyllis.
Well, thank you, Frank. Great to be with you.
My first question focuses on the economy in general, and then specifically whether you think the economic crisis that we are in now might turn into a banking crisis.
Well, Frank, that is the question we get most often. I think because people remember the 2008, 2009 period. So, what I would say was that today is not like any time we've experienced before, but to your specific question, I think our bank is just as strong as ever before, and the banking sector is from a liquidity and certainly a capital standpoint, unlike 2008-9. So there's no question that all of us will experience adverse earnings because of loan losses and a number of other things. But our chairman CEO, Jamie Dimon, said recently in his shareholder letter, if we should decline in GDP by as much as 35%, which we would describe as an extremely adverse economic scenario, we will be fine. We will be fine in terms of both liquidity as well as capital.
So if we stay in the framework of treating obstacles as opportunities, how can the banking industry come out of this with a better reputation than it went in?
Sure. Well, I think, Frank, the main thing is that we understand that we need to take a stakeholder view, especially during this crisis and these times of stress. The thing is, we understand that we've got to look at our employees, certainly. Are we taking care of our employees? Are they healthy? All of that, because we're an essential business. For example, we've had to stay open in our branch system. We've got to look at certainly our communities. That's very important. And of course, our customers and all of the other stakeholders that are there. So I think if we really focus on a balanced view of how we treat all of our stakeholders, we will do the right thing, and we will, as a result, certainly come out of this with a reputation that is solid. Let me just give you a couple examples. Certainly with our employees, again, the health, making sure that we're giving our employees flexibility, that we really make sure that we pay attention to our workforce has been very important, one of our principles as we've gone into this crisis. But most of all, our customers, certainly we're in touch with our customers. We're looking at lending, how we can make sure that we're meeting lending needs, we're meeting all of the needs of our customers as we go through this. And then, as I mentioned, communities. As you know, with the Foster School, a great example that we're proud of is our partnership with the Consulting Business Development Center to make sure that they're strong and they can be out there with consulting and advice to some of our distressed and underserved businesses. And so that's just an example I give you as to how we take a stakeholder view. And again, doing the right thing, I think, will result in hopefully success with all of our stakeholders, therefore, hopefully, the improved reputation as you reference.
Yeah. And I think the time period that we're in with all the uncertainty can be pretty scary. So how do you deal with fear?
Well, I tell you, I wish I could write a book on that, because I probably have made every mistake, because just like everyone else, I'm human. And I go through a time when I'm fearful, which is often these days, especially in the last 60 days. And I realize that I've got to, first of all, control my emotions. That's the hardest part, because fear, uncertainty, anxiety, it's all human nature. And I think all of us, even as many situations as we're in, we go through this kind of human cycle of denial, eventually the trying to cope with it, and then eventually accept it and get on to what we need to do. But I don't think I'm really good at it yet. I still have to go through that range of emotions. So I would certainly say that this crisis has tested me as a leader, but as nothing like before. And I've really had to, on a daily basis, just swallow hard, ask myself what I can control, ask myself how I'm doing, stay resilient, stay focused, and then hopefully move on to some resolution.
Can you provide a specific example of where you felt scared or fearful during this pandemic?
Well, let me give you one example that is before the pandemic and maybe one related to the pandemic. So a similar situation I was in 2011 was I was stuck in the earthquake and tsunami in Japan, and I was scheduled to leave and come back the next day. So I, had no experience being in a major earthquake like that. It was almost a 7.0 magnitude earthquake with a resulting tsunami. And there were many, many aftershocks. And of course, then, the airport shut down and all of the transportation was shut down. I happened to be in Tokyo. So I guess I would say that's one of the most major disasters that I've been in. And it was so frightening. And just to watch the human destruction and the human problems and the cost to society was probably even more distressing to me. I'd never experienced anything like that. So a lot of that, I think I learned a lot about my emotions and probably at least dealing with a major disaster. So fast forward to the COVID crisis today. I think the first sign of it that I had was on March 5th. We just had our management leadership retreat. We were talking about the plans for the year and about how we were going to move forward. And then all of a sudden the county health director came out saying, this is serious, folks, on March 5th. You need to get your employees to work from home. This is more than just a casual crisis. We're beginning to see startling health numbers. And so it was hard for me to even process the magnitude of what was here and what was coming. But I remember getting our crisis team on the phone and saying, this is serious, folks. We've got to get our act together, cancel all events. We've got to begin to start tomorrow in our work from home planning. And that was something where, again, I had no template for, because we rehearsed this many times. If we had an earthquake, if we had a major disaster, but never anything like this. And so I really have to tell you, Frank, it was hard to even absorb the magnitude of what we were dealing with that week, but moreover, what we were faced with in the subsequent weeks.
Yeah, that's interesting. You probably saw me shaking my head while you're speaking, because I had a similar experience in Japan. Now, I have to go all the way back to the late 80s, but I was working in Japan when a very powerful typhoon hit. And it's the first time I've been right in the middle of a natural disaster where you absolutely have no control over what's going to happen to you. And that was a very scary moment for me. So I had a similar experience. And then here at the Foster School, the Foster School had the first student who tested positive on the UW campus. And so my immediate reaction was, oh my gosh, how do we care for not only that student, but for everyone now within the Foster community? Because we're the first, there's no template for this. And so I had similar experiences. So thank you very much.
Well, and I think your point too is it's first you have to deal with your own emotions. And the first thing you think about is my safety. And then all of a sudden you, as a leader, you have to quickly transition to, who am I responsible for? What am I responsible for? What's the magnitude of this on our employees, our customers, our communities? And that you really have to quickly get through. And I think that's really what I'm saying is you have to deal with your personal emotions first, then get on to what we're really trained and paid to do as leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of leaders, so you're on several boards. Can you describe your interactions with the CEOs and leadership of those companies and how that's changed during this time?
Sure. Well, I am on the board of Alaska Airlines, and, I'd say certainly there's no sector that's been harder hit than transportation, retail, restaurants, hospitality. I mean, it's stunning how fast the crisis hit. Alaska Airlines and all the other airlines and certainly transportation related industries. I would say more than anything, part of what we're talking about here with dealing with a crisis, we have to bring our best business judgment and frameworks, I guess, to the board. And again, with no templates, no previous experience, I think the good news is that companies like Alaska, other companies that we advise, they really have come to the board and to us as advisors with more questions than answers. So we spend a lot of time, in Alaska's case, probably 2 to 3 times a week on calls, talking about scenarios, talking about what we know, talking about what we don't know, and really then mining the best advice from all of the outside advisors like the board. So I'd certainly say I've learned a lot through this. I've learned that there are less answers than questions, but I've also learned that if you come together as a team and collaborate, you can generally come up with at least a template of a go forward survival strategy, which is really, I think, what a lot of businesses are going through right now. So it is a tough time, and I think just asking more questions and asking outside advisors and asking people outside of the board even is really the I guess, the path forward that I found is the best.
Yeah, I found it critical to develop that crisis management team, right? It's about the people, but you need people around you to make decisions to help your broader community. And so that was something I hadn't thought about as a leader and needed to think about very quickly. Who needs to be on that team and how can we best serve the foster community of students,
Yes, and
faculty?
having humility. I think
Mhm.
that's the other thing, is that I think all of us have to say this is like nothing we've seen before, and having a humble sense of we don't have the answers. We don't know how long this is going to last. Is this a long U-shaped recession? Is this a W recession? We don't know. We just don't know. So I
Yeah.
think part of it is just having a humble mindset. And as you say, bringing the best people around the table and asking the questions and asking for advice and listening is probably the best thing that most of us can do during these times.
You mentioned humility. I want to turn a little bit, and Brene Brown is author of some leadership books like Daring Greatly. And she advocates that as a leader that we should have two core values that we use when making decisions. Can you talk about the core values that you use to make decisions?
Sure. Well, I'm a big Brene Brown fan, so
Good.
glad you
Me
brought
too.
her up. Yeah, she's great. And I've heard her speak several times and read a lot of her books. I think a couple core values that I would point out during these times, I think we all probably have a set of 5 or 6, but could I have a third maybe? Um, I guess the three that I would point out would be, number one, I think stay calm and centered. I think that really gets back to your point about core values. What's at your core and how do you connect with those core values? And by being calm and centered, I really do connect with that core of what I really am and what I've been trained to do and my lifetime of experiences. But if I'm not calm and I'm not centered, I never really can access that inner core. So I'd say calm and centered, and that brings forth a lot of what I know intuitively and what I probably would say is at the core of my values. So that's the first one. The second one is collaborative, and I think that gets back to what we were just talking about
Uh-huh.
a few minutes ago. Is again, I don't have the answers. I've got to be collaborative and listen, and I ask as many questions too as I have answers for. But I think really just listening, saying, what don't I know? What should I know? What are your issues? How do you think I could have done better, or we could have done better? What do we need to think about? So just being certainly of that mindset that collaboration is so important during these times. So my only third one I'm going to sneak in is a little bit about creativity, and that might sound like an odd one during these times, but I heard someone talking about that not too long ago as an important value during these times. You can really get stuck in the survival mode and the how do we
Mm.
save cash, or how do we keep the doors open, or how do we just live day to day. But in business, I think we also need to always think about what's going to be different. How do we use our creativity to rethink things? What's the reset? And I think if we do that in parallel and can help our companies that we advise, or in our case, companies that we bank, if we can help them in parallel think through what's the reset, how are you thinking about coming out the other end, what's different about the business model, how will society be different? I think those are the creative questions that I think all of us really should focus on.
Yeah, and I think research supports that. I think it shows that in the past, those that did nothing don't do well coming out, and those that did too much don't do well. So if you just cut everything and kind of fold up and say, we'll come out of our hole when this is over, those companies don't tend to do well. It's the ones that get it right in the middle, continue to spend and be ready to accelerate out of the other end of this downturn.
Right.
Yeah.
Agree.
So we talked a little bit about Brene Brown. How do you as a leader develop yourself, not only during this difficult time, but in general?
Sure. Well, intellectual curiosity has always been something that I probably prided myself on. And during these times, especially, I'm reading everything I can, reading articles from futurists, reading articles from economists, and lots of different people who are helping to maybe frame not only where are we today, but what are the shifts that will be underway in society as a result of the crisis, as a result of the politics of the world situation. So I guess I'm just curious. I like to read, think think, how does this affect the companies that I advise, the bank that I'm with? How does this affect everything? And I think just having that intellectually curious mindset always, whether it's a crisis or not, is something that I find has been really part of my maybe success. But I think the other thing that I found during this crisis, which is something that's a shame on me, is that I've had a lot more reflective time. And when I say that, I say it in that the shame on me is, like you and everybody else, we get scheduled 24/7. We've had a traditional office setting where we've had busy days from early morning till late at night through dinners, and everything's been scheduled. So part of what I would say is this time has provided these hours in between Zoom meetings, these pauses in our day to just sit down, look out the window, and really just reflect and live with myself, and to meditate a little bit, if you will. And that, I think, has really brought forth that reserve that we talked about a little bit earlier, those core values, the things that I know, the things that I need to bring to situations that I probably didn't really necessarily focus on. So I'd say more reflective time, which maybe gets to the intellectually curious thing. How does one thing affect another? How will things change? What can I think about differently? How can I help my clients and my boards that I sit on think about things differently? So it's actually been a little bit of a silver lining.
And Phyllis, you're known as a very calm, thoughtful, grounded, centered
Sometimes.
leader. And so that you talked a little bit about how you deal with stressful situations. Can you talk a little bit more about that? So how do you deal with the stress that goes with leading a major organization?
Well, a lot of my stress reducers have been taken away. I normally would I still get up at 4:30, 4:45 every morning, even though I don't necessarily have to. And my former routine was to get up, get in my car, avoid the commute, get down to the Washington Athletic Club and work out every morning, which was really my main outlet, if you will, for setting the day and getting rid of some stress. Of course, that's been taken away. So this is a little bit of a reset. So I've had to change my routines. But I think what I've stayed with, Frank, is just a little bit of thinking about how my new routine looks. Part of it is still taking my walk in the morning, getting a little bit outside very early. So 5:30 in the morning, you'll see me, probably the only one, my husband and I walking in our neighborhood. It really has been good for me just to get outside, walk around, just again, use that time for a little bit of reflection. So I think part of that, a little bit of, again, the pauses in the day to read and or reflect. And then I think the other thing is practicing every day, letting go of things I don't control. And believe me, that's hard for somebody like me who is into control and thinks that I can control more than I actually do. So I've just had to say to myself, you don't control that. Look, that, the governor shut that down, and it is the way it is, and it will stay closed until other people decide it's going to be open, and so be it. Or I can't fly to Hawaii. I have my vacation scheduled, but it's not going to happen because of the quarantine. So let go of it. I mean, I don't like it, but I don't control so much. And especially these few months, I mean, so much has been out of our control collectively. So part of it is just letting go.
Yeah, I am so thankful for those early morning workouts, especially now that the sun is starting to come up just after 5 o'clock. And so being out there and feeling kind of at one with nature is really important and helps energize me in the morning.
It definitely does. And the sun, as you say, the sunshine helps too. So it's all been good with spring and summer coming.
How do you prepare for difficult or tough conversations in a business environment?
Well, that is certainly never easy. And I guess as leaders, if we ever think that having a tough conversation or telling people about layoffs, that their job is being eliminated, if we ever think that's easy, then we should get out of this business, so to speak. I think the main things I've learned about that are twofold. One is be sure that people understand the why. I mean, we're all so geared. I'm, results oriented, get to the what, tell people what's going to happen and when and how. And all of a sudden you realize you really forgot to talk about the why. Why is this important? What's happening in the organization? It's so much of the background things that people need to have to help them process tough decisions. So that I think is something where I've had to pause and say, take your time and let people really have some visibility into the why. I guess the second thing I would say is just be really transparent and fair. And fair is a tough one to always judge, but I think with employees and tough conversations, particularly if it's letting someone go, I think the transparency is important, not just in the decision, but leading up to the decision. Have you given people adequate notice? Have they been talked to about how they can improve or what's going on? But if there's a decision that just happens because it happens, then I think part of it is you just have to be fair and understand that, you're talking about people's lives here, and there's just something you can do to make sure that the person feels like you've been fair and transparent in the decision.
Yeah. And I think being authentic is so critical, because if you're an authentic leader, then the person you're talking with this difficult topic about knows that you're there and you're listening to them. So you're completely with them during this difficult time. And I think that's really important as a leader.
Yeah, I think authenticity, and that's why I'm glad you brought up Dr. Brene Brown. That's certainly her core principle, is always being an authentic leader, which really gets back to that consistency of behavior and making people feel that this is not an easy decision for you either. And I think that's part of letting your feelings in, letting your authenticity show, because if you just approach it like it's a antiseptic decision and this is the way it is, and there's no caring or no transparency in the communication, then I don't think the decision goes over very well. It's not going to go over well anyway, but to your point, authenticity is really important.
Yeah. Phyllis, we often hear about women in tech relative to men in tech. Can you talk a little bit about women in banking relative to men in banking?
Sure. Well, the good news is we've made a lot of progress. I think banking is certainly one of the leading industries where we see visible progress in gender diversity. And certainly if I look at JP Morgan Chase, 50% of our very top team are female, 30% of our global leadership, senior leadership workforce are female, which is terrific. And then if I look at even the Seattle region, I'm really proud of the fact that 4 out of the 5 largest banks are led by women. So that to me is really amazing in my lifetime, to see that kind of gender diversity. And yes, we have a ways to go in other types of diversity, but I really do feel like banking has recognized that we've got to bring not only just the best diverse talent to the table, but really be inclusive in how we listen, how we reach out, how we, again, reflect our communities. And so we're on a journey, but I think we've made good progress.
Any travel plans, Phyllis?
Well, I've got to wear the Alaska brand, don't I? Of course, I've got travel plans as soon as the mandates drop. I am probably not going to travel internationally for a while. Business travel is limited. We've self-limited that for a little while. But of course, I'm going to, as soon as the mandates open up, I'm going to be the first one on one of those Alaska Airlines planes.
Window or aisle?
From a safety standpoint, the planes are as clean as they've ever been. So I like my window seat because I get to look out the window and see where I'm going. So I've always been more of a window fan myself.
Phyllis, thank you so much for joining me today. I greatly appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you, Frank, and thanks for your great leadership at the Foster School. Much appreciated.
Be safe.